Okay, in this quick clip here, we're going to talk about a common problem that comes up in discussions about the God question. Sometimes we're talking to people, this issue comes up. I know that it's come up in many of my conversations with others, so I hope some of these tips help. I use this a lot when I'm on college campuses when I talk to people about the God question. In many cases, we may run into people who say that they don't know if God exists, or they can't know if God exists, or they're not sure how to know if God exists. And you know what this really means? It means that they don't know how to attain knowledge of God. They don't know how to know or what method to use to attain knowledge of God, that God exists. Then some people may even say that you can't even attain any knowledge of God's existence. There's just no way to know. You can't arrive at any knowledge of God's existence. So it really boils down to a knowledge issue. We're talking about how do we have knowledge of God? How can we attain knowledge of God? And one thing I always ask back to people who bring this up is how should God give knowledge of himself to humanity? What that means is if God wants us to know what he is like, what should he do? Should he take the initiative to do something to give us knowledge of him? Should he pick a medium to communicate to us? If you think about it, when we form relationships with other people, whether it be our future wives or friends or coworkers, in order for that relationship to be initiated, somebody has to communicate something. And that person generally picks a medium like an email, or they speak verbally, or they write something down. They may text. The point is something has to happen. Somebody has to initiate communication. And then the other person receives that communication, decides if that relationship is going to be formed or not. And so that's why all relationships are formed. We have to greet them, we have to meet them, we have to talk to them, we have to initiate contact. And so the question becomes with God, if God wants us to know he is real, should he pick some sort of medium to communicate with us? I mean, we pick emails and phone calls and things like that, but what medium would God pick to communicate to humans? And shouldn't he pick a medium? Because after all, if he wants us to have knowledge of who he is, he would have to take the initiative to do something. And hopefully we should be able to receive that communication. Now, obviously, many people will say, well, how would I know? I mean, how would I have knowledge in? What is the medium God picks? We'll talk about that in a second. But, sometimes we forget that there's been a ton of work done on certain ways people think they can have knowledge about God. One way is certainly through natural theology or deduction. That means that we can reason there is a God in the world of nature. That's where we don't use the Bible, but we think we can look at the natural world and we can make inferences about certain cause and effect relationships, or we can see God's handiwork in the world of biology or cosmology or physics or something like that. And we can make inferences there about there's some sort of designer behind the world of nature. Now, I know that leads to a big debate. I'm just going over the basic avenues here. Another way people think they can have knowledge about God, or sometimes we talk about, is the issue of historical arguments. That means we look into history and we see if God has spoken somewhere into the world of history. He's revealed himself through a prophet or a book or a text or something. Of course, we believe Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God. We believe God brought him into history in the nation of Israel, and he is the ultimate revelation of God. Of course, we can debate that and compare that claim with other religions like Islam or something else. We've done that for hundreds of years. Sometimes people might look in the world of science. Of course, science studies the natural world, and science generally won't allow God explanations, but there are many people who are scientists who do believe they see God's handiwork in the world of nature. And then we have abduction or inference the best explanation. That's kind of similar to what we've been talking about already, that people look into the world of nature or the world of history and they make an inference to what is the best explanation for that feature of reality. And they think that nature alone cannot account for that. They think there must be some sort of mind or intelligence behind that feature of reality. And then for some people, they try a specific faith. They try out the religion in their lives. They test it. They put it to the test, like Christianity or another faith, and they say it's made a big difference in my life. I've seen God work in my life. I see results, pragmatically speaking. And then, of course, that's similar or related to somewhat what we call experientialism, where some people just know experientially. They have knowledge of God directly. That means they look in the world of nature and they have an experience where they say there must be a God. They may look at the world of creation and say, I just know God exists. Of course, Paul talks about this in Romans 1, that people do know God exists, but people reject that because they don't want moral accountability. And then, of course, an existential approach is where people desire things like meaning, hope, value. They want to be loved. They think about the afterlife, things like that. They have these big existential questions, and they think God is the one who provides answers to those big questions. And so therefore they get knowledge of God as an explanation for those big questions that they have, or those big existential issues in their lives. And of course, biblically speaking, we believe that God has to take the initiative to reveal himself to humanity because people are dead and blinded by sin. We are not able to reach up to God fully. We need God to take the initiative to show what he's like to humanity, and God needs to set the parameters as to how he will reveal himself to man. And of course, I just talked a little bit about this, that the two primary ways we believe God has revealed himself to humans or shown himself or given knowledge of himself. Remember that knowledge issue, meaning it means that in one way is that we do not need the Bible to know some things about God. That means we can look in the world of nature and know there is a God. And then we can look into history and we believe God has revealed himself through an authoritative text. So that means that we can read the Bible and have knowledge of God's character, his attributes. We can learn that he's moral and kind and just and merciful. And then, of course, Jesus is the ultimate revelation of God. And so if someone is open to look at these issues about whether we can have knowledge of God in the world of nature, you can read books like this, or take a look at these, explore these issues in books like these. Some other ones right here. We don't need the Bible to start thinking about the existence of God. We can look at some of these books on natural theology and arguments for God in the world of nature first. But if someone wants to ultimately find out about what God is like in all his attributes, meaning his character attributes, they will have to look into history. And that means that they will need to explore the evidence for Jesus and whether he rose from the dead and whether he is the ultimate revelation of God. So the question becomes, when someone asks you, or they say, I don't know if God exists, or I can't know, you just need to ask them, how would we have knowledge of God? What should God do? And then once you go over these issues with them about how God has given knowledge of himself in nature and history, if they say, well, that's not good enough, he should appear to me directly, remember, they don't really know what they mean by God at that point. And the only way you're going to know about what God you're looking for, what God's supposed to reveal himself to you, is if you have some concrete idea of what God is. And the only way you know who God is or what he is if he reveals himself in some way. How would you know anything about me unless I took the initiative to speak to you or talk to you or do something so you would form a relationship with me? Okay? So this may seem very basic, but a lot of people don't know this, and a lot of people are so off track trying to go through all these hoops. So the biggest question, or the best question to ask people, is how should we have knowledge of God? How should God give knowledge of himself to humanity? And you can go from there. Have a good day.